What did Jesus write on the ground? A finger moves through pale dust, and the famous story refuses to answer. The hand belongs to Jesus, crouched before accusers who demand a judgment, while an adult woman waits exposed behind him. The honest answer comes immediately. The story says Jesus wrote twice, yet it preserves not one word of what he wrote. Instead, it shows scribes and Pharisees pressing closer, turning a public lesson in the temple into a dangerous confrontation. The woman stands in the center, accused of adultery, visible to everyone while her unnamed partner is nowhere in the scene. We will test four things: the physical gesture, the legal trap, proposed biblical echoes, and the passage's manuscript history. Jesus does not answer on their schedule. He bends down and directs his finger toward the ground beneath the crowd. A stone in one hand makes the question physical, but the text never says an execution had formally begun. Two Torah scrolls frame the charge, because the accusers appeal to Moses and demand that Jesus declare what should happen. The first hard surprise: several earliest Greek witnesses omit this story, and later copies place it in more than one location. Back in the courtyard, Jesus rises only after they continue questioning him, forcing the pressure of the crowd into view. His reply is short: the sinless person should be first to throw a stone at her. Then an older hand loosens. The story says the accusers begin leaving one by one, starting with the elders. Jesus bends down again and writes again, repeating the unexplained action while the semicircle slowly opens. The transmitted scene begins with people going home, Jesus going to the Mount of Olives, and an early return to the temple, where he sits and teaches the gathered crowd. The sequence enters already in motion. That setting matters because this is not a private consultation. The accusers interrupt public teaching, place the woman in the middle, and ask for a ruling before many attentive witnesses. The public setting intensifies every word spoken. The narrator also states their motive. They are testing Jesus so they can obtain grounds for accusation. The legal question is therefore a trap deliberately aimed at the teacher. The audience itself becomes part of the pressure. Yet the passage gives no formal indictment, witness list, interrogation record, or court verdict. We should not rebuild those missing pieces as though the narrator had quietly supplied them. Silence in the record must remain silence. What it does supply is a striking imbalance. Leviticus chapter 20 treats adultery as an offense involving both the adulterer and the adulteress, not one conveniently isolated defendant. The law's paired language is difficult to ignore. Deuteronomy chapter 22 likewise names both parties when a married woman and a man are found together. In this story, however, only the woman is publicly presented. That contrast becomes our first legal anchor. That missing man does not prove one particular conspiracy. It does reveal selective presentation, making the accuser's appeal to Torah look incomplete on the story's own stated terms. The asymmetry is visible before any theory begins. The woman may be guilty, framed, exploited, or caught exactly as alleged. The text does not let us choose. Its focus remains the use of her case against Jesus. Her uncertainty must remain part of ours. Their wording asks what he says, but their purpose is accusation. Whatever answer he gives can be pulled into conflict over law, authority, mercy, and public legitimacy before the crowd. Every possible response carries political consequences. Some retellings imagine a perfectly defined stoning procedure already underway. The narrative is less specific. A charge is announced, Moses is invoked, and Jesus is pressed for an answer. The difference protects us from theatrical invention. Roman power makes the setting more complicated, not simpler. Judean leaders, temple authorities, local courts, crowds, and imperial officials did not operate inside one neat modern jurisdiction chart. Overlapping powers made simple slogans unreliable. John 18 reports leaders telling Pilate that they were not permitted to execute Jesus. But that sentence cannot by itself settle every capital case or every outbreak of violence. The political setting remains debated and uneven, so the trap should not be reduced to one guaranteed legal fork. The story tells us only that the question was designed to create usable grounds for accusing him. Anything more precise would exceed the narrator. Jesus answers first with posture. By lowering himself, he interrupts the rhythm of demand, refuses eye-level combat, and gives the crowded court something unexpected and quiet to watch. The delay is now visible, not merely implied. Verse 6 describes his finger marking the ground. In an important form of the transmitted Greek, the verb is katagrapho, a compound related to writing, marking, or tracing. The compound itself cannot decode the marks. That verb has invited elaborate claims about written accusations, formal records, or hidden codes. But a writing verb cannot preserve its object when the sentence never supplies one. Grammar alone cannot restore a missing object. Verse 8 uses the simpler grapho when Jesus bends down again. The vocabulary shift may interest readers, but neither verb identifies words, names, verses, symbols, or a secret message. Lexical nuance is not recovered content. The doubled action is more secure than any proposed message. He bends, writes, rises to answer, then bends and writes again while the accusers begin leaving the court. Repetition, not inscription, is the stable clue. The finger itself also attracts biblical echoes. Scripture remembers the divine finger in acts of power and in the giving of stone tablets, but an echo is never a transcript. The image invites comparison without demanding identity. One widespread proposal says Jesus wrote the accuser's sins, perhaps matching each man with a private offense until shame, fear, or exposed hypocrisy emptied the courtyard. The theory is vivid because it personalizes judgment. That idea explains why individuals depart, and some later textual traditions expand the scene toward sins. Yet the earliest recoverable wording lists no accusation that Jesus wrote. Expansion is evidence of interpretation, not confirmation. A related proposal says he wrote their names. It gains force from Jeremiah chapter 17, where those who abandon the Lord are described as written in the earth. Here, the earth itself becomes the proposed clue. Jeremiah's image belongs to a passage about forsaking the fountain of living waters. Because John has just featured festival water imagery, some readers see a deliberate scriptural resonance. That nearby imagery makes the suggestion understandable. The connection is suggestive, especially when names, earth, judgment, and departure appear together. Still, the story never cites Jeremiah, and ground writing alone cannot establish that specific allusion. Responsible comparison stops short of certainty. Another interpretation looks to Exodus. The finger of God writes commandments on stone, so Jesus' finger may signal divine authority over the law that his opponents invoke. The visual parallel is powerful but incomplete. This proposal illuminates the confrontation between Moses, judgment, and Jesus. Its weakness is the material contrast. The story says ground, not tablets, and records no commandments being copied. Resonance should not be mistaken for quotation. A judicial reading treats the gesture as something like writing a charge, drafting a judgment, recording testimony, or performing the composed work of a judge before speaking. Composure may resemble judgment without proving procedure. That approach fits the courtroom atmosphere, but we lack a documented rule saying a teacher in this exact temple setting would write in dust as recognized legal procedure. No surviving handbook closes that evidentiary gap. The simplest reading may be behavioral. Jesus creates silence, delays the demanded answer, and refuses to let hostile questioners control the pace or emotional temperature of judgment. It requires the fewest invisible details. This interpretation does not decode the marks. It explains their narrative function, which is often more defensible because the storyteller shows the action carefully while withholding the content. Function can be clearer than hidden wording. When the leading proposals are compared, each solves a different problem. Sins explain departures. Jeremiah explains earth. Exodus explains the finger. Judicial readings explain authority. Delay explains pacing. Comparison reveals both insight and assumption. No proposal explains every detail without adding something absent from the text. That does not make these readings worthless, but it changes their label from recovered fact to interpretation. Labels matter when evidence runs out. The most honest conclusion at this stage is narrow. The verbs confirm writing or marking, the sequence confirms repetition, and the surviving story never discloses the actual message. That limit will guide the manuscript investigation. Now the camera must leave the temple pavement and move to a manuscript desk, because before asking what the words were, we must ask where this whole scene appears. The location question changes the scale of mystery. Papyrus 66 and Papyrus 75, two very early surviving Greek witnesses to John, move through the surrounding material without including the woman accused of adultery. The omission appears within otherwise continuous text. Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, major 4th century Greek Bibles, also omit the passage at its traditional position between the end of John 7 and John 8. Both codices are central witnesses to this discussion. This is not merely a torn page problem. The surrounding text continues, allowing readers to see the transition where later Bibles often print the familiar and beloved scene. The missing unit is visible through continuity. An important early Greek witness that does contain the passage is Codex Bezae, a manuscript whose wording often differs noticeably from other surviving Greek copies. Its presence therefore matters greatly, but carefully. Bezae proves the story was circulating in Greek by that stage. It does not prove the passage stood in John's first edition, and omission elsewhere does not prove invention. Both cautions are necessary at once. Most modern textual critics therefore judge that John 7:53 through 8:11 was not originally part of the Gospel's continuous text at this location. This remains the broad critical judgment today. That judgment explains why many modern Bibles place brackets around the passage, set it off typographically, or attach a note about the earliest surviving manuscript evidence. The typography makes uncertainty visible to ordinary readers. A footnote is not an attempt to erase the story. It is a compact report that the surviving copies disagree about whether this narrative unit belongs here. That is disclosure, not dismissal. Nor does manuscript absence alone tell us whether an early memory about Jesus lies behind the account. Textual criticism traces copies more securely than it reconstructs unrecorded events. Historical possibility and textual placement are separate questions. The story's long reception also matters. It has shaped preaching, art, ethics, law, and Christian imagination for centuries, even while its precise location remained textually unstable. Reception history answers a different kind of question. Textual criticism compares manuscripts, dates, families, wording, corrections, and copying patterns. It asks which reading best explains the rise of others, not which story feels most beloved. The method is comparative rather than devotional or hostile. The movable placement is especially revealing. Many manuscripts put the episode after John 7:52, the familiar position reflected in most printed Bibles and public memory. Yet familiar placement is only one placement. Other witnesses position it elsewhere in John, including after earlier material in chapter 7, after chapter 8 begins, or near the ending of the Gospel. Movement within John already signals instability. A group of manuscripts places the story after Luke 21:38, near a notice that Jesus taught in the temple early in the morning. This is the best-known relocation outside John. That Lucan position may have seemed narratively suitable because the episode also opens with early temple teaching. Suitability, however, is not proof that Luke originally wrote it. Narrative fit can influence where copyists place material. When the same block travels among several locations, it behaves less like a paragraph anchored from the beginning and more like a respected story seeking a textual home. Mobility is strong evidence about textual attachment. That is an inference from transmission, not a verdict on historical truth. A copyist could preserve a valued tradition while remaining uncertain about exactly where it belonged. Transmission history and event history are not identical. Some manuscripts mark the passage with signs of doubt. Others include it normally. Still others omit it. The page itself records generations of ancient editorial decisions. Variation survives because copyists made different choices. Modern readers often meet this history through brackets and footnotes, but the evidence is older than modern skepticism. Manuscripts preserve both devotion to the story and uncertainty about placement. The page preserves uncertainty instead of concealing it. This complexity need not become a contest between faith and scholarship. Honest reading can respect the passage's moral power, while admitting its Johannine location is probably secondary. Truthful explanation does not require contempt. Communities may still read it devotionally, and scholars may study possible historical roots. Neither practice requires hiding what Papyrus 66, Papyrus 75, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and Bezae show. Evidence can be faced without mocking devotion. Return now to the dust. The narrator never moves close enough for us to read the marks, even though the finger, bending, rising, and repetition receive unusual attention. The camera emphasizes movement rather than legibility. That choice may redirect the question. Instead of asking only what hidden sentence lay on the ground, we can ask what the visible gesture accomplishes inside the confrontation. The storyteller controls what the audience can know. It breaks the accuser's timetable. They demand an instant ruling, but Jesus lowers his body, withholds speech, and lets their own persistence become part of the visible evidence. Delay becomes part of the moral action. If you value documentaries that separate text, context, interpretation, and uncertainty, subscribe to World Behind the Verse. Then follow the finger immediately back into the courtyard. The invitation is brief because the evidence continues. Jesus rises and gives one condition. The person without sin should initiate the throwing. The answer neither declares adultery harmless, nor gives the accusers the performance they demanded. His sentence redirects responsibility toward every accuser. The story says they leave one by one, beginning with the elders. It does not explain each conscience, expose individual crimes, or say they read their names. The departures remain narrated, but psychologically unexplained. Then Jesus writes a second time. That renewed silence gives space for departure, turning the court from a packed semicircle into an emptied foreground around the woman. Empty space becomes the scene's newest evidence. When only Jesus and the woman remain, he asks where her accusers are and whether anyone has condemned her. She answers simply that no one has. The threatened public spectacle has quietly collapsed. He then refuses condemnation and tells her to leave and not continue in sin. Mercy and moral seriousness remain together, without the accusers controlling either one. The final exchange belongs to neither mob nor trap. The writing therefore functions even when its content remains unreadable. It delays coercion, exposes asymmetry, shifts attention toward the accusers, and opens time for stones to remain unthrown. The gesture changes what can happen next. The strongest answer has 4 layers, and keeping them separate prevents both skepticism and imagination from pretending to know more than the surviving evidence allows. Clear layers prevent confident guesses from hardening into facts. First, the story explicitly says Jesus wrote on the ground with his finger, answered after repeated questioning, and wrote again. It explicitly preserves no written words. This first layer is the firm textual floor. Second, Torah passages involving adultery address both parties, while this scene presents one woman as the instrument of a trap. That asymmetry sharpens the narrative without solving her case. The second layer explains pressure, not hidden biography. Third, later interpreters proposed sins, names, Jeremiah's earth, Exodus's divine finger, a judicial act, or deliberate delay. Each illuminates something, none recovers the missing inscription. The third layer maps reception, not recovered handwriting. Fourth, the manuscript trail shows that the episode is absent from major early Greek witnesses, appears in Codex Bezae, and moves among locations in later transmission. The fourth layer concerns the passage itself. These layers can coexist. The story can remain morally powerful, its placement can remain textually disputed, and its unwritten content can remain beyond responsible historical recovery. Together they form the fullest responsible answer. What cannot be recovered is the exact sentence, list, symbol, or verse traced on the ground. No surviving manuscript preserves it, and no archaeological mark supplies it. That boundary is not failure, it is accuracy. What can be known is what the storyteller makes the gesture do. Suspend forced judgment, turn scrutiny toward the accusers, and create room for a different ending. Known function survives where unknown content does not. So the mystery remains honest. The dust keeps no readable secret, but the repeated movement of Jesus' hand reshapes the human scene gathered around it. Uncertainty can sharpen attention rather than weaken it. Which explanation had you heard before? Sins, names, Jeremiah, the tablets, a judicial act, or deliberate silence? Tell us which one first shaped your reading. The question keeps interpretation open and evidence visible. Subscribe to World Behind the Verse for more calm investigations where manuscripts, language, law, and physical details clarify scripture without manufacturing certainty. The final invitation continues the channel's method.